Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Hamali and I talk about things that nobody else wants to talk about while I do my makeup. Now before we get into this video, I have two things to address. First is I did apply to Sephora Squad, so I would really appreciate it if you guys could leave me a testimonial. I will leave the link to the testimonial page in the description below, but I would love if you guys could say a few kind words about how I've helped you in any way possible, whether it was through makeup, whether it's through these talks that I have. It just would really help me. I am dying to get on the Sephora Squad. I've been applying for a few years now and unfortunately I've never made it on, so fingers crossed that this is my year. Second thing is I'm having a bit of an allergic reaction around my eyes, so I have broke out into a rash. So if my makeup application is looking a little bit rough today, that's probably why. Anyways, let's get into this video. Last week I put up a question box on my Instagram stories asking you guys to share your brown girl problems. There was two comments that really stood out to me and I just wanted to focus this entire video on this subject. So the first person said her brown girl problem is having to ask permission from parents for every little thing, even though I'm 23 years old. And then the second person made a very similar comment saying not having the freedom to make my own decisions in my 20s. Now I'm 31 and I can remember this feeling all too well. Having parents that are strict, controlling, and traditional is probably one of the most frustrating things to deal with. My parents were like this, but I wouldn't say to the absolute extreme. Like, I knew girls that had it way worse than me growing up. For me, I felt like my parents were strict and controlling and more traditional, but I was still able to kind of get away with things because I felt like they always kind of came around and I knew that and I used that to my advantage. Now, I know not everyone's parents are like that, so take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm really just sharing my own experiences. I'm not saying this is what you have to do or this is what you should do. It's more just telling you my life story and you can do what you want with that information. I remember I couldn't even go out to my car to grab something without my parents asking me where I was going. And I'm like, damn, I'm just like going to the car. I can't even leave the house without being questioned about where I'm going. I know a lot of this questioning comes from a good place. They just didn't want me getting into any situations that would harm me. I think like a lot of parents, they just, you know, want to make sure their kid is safe and protected. But their method definitely got to a point where it felt just so suffocating. It felt like I could not live my life at all. And anything that I wanted to do or wanted to try was just knocked down. I would never be allowed to do it. And so it basically got to a point where I just started to lie. I became a very good liar and I lied to my parents all the time. Now, really there was three levels of how I dealt with this situation. When I was very young, it started off with just pure lies. And then as I got older, it kind of transitioned into more white lies, half truths. And then it transitioned into, I'm just gonna tell them what I'm doing. I'm not really gonna ask for permission. It's just like a heads up of this is what's happening. Even if they didn't like it, I would go do it and just deal with the consequences later. I know there's going to be people that don't agree with what I'm saying and truly believe that honesty is the best policy and that you should just like try to talk to your parents, but until you've been in that situation, you don't fully understand what it's like, and sometimes communication isn't really helpful in the situation and it's actually more harmful. I found sometimes that when I was honest, it actually made the situation worse because it felt like now my parents knew what I was gonna do and they were gonna try everything in their power to stop me, especially when I was a little bit younger, like I would say in my teens and early 20s. So in order for me to feel like I had any type of life or any type of freedom, I had to lie. Like it was almost a survival tactic. It's not like I wanted to do this, but it felt like I had no other choice. Because if I didn't go about my life this way, I honestly wouldn't have had a life at all. Like I would have missed out on so many experiences. Now, like I mentioned, how I handled the situation really did evolve as I got older. But then again, a lot of this was situational based. Like some methods obviously made more sense in certain situations and in certain contexts than others. So I'm just going to take you guys through a few examples of what I mean by this. I definitely lied a lot more when I was younger because I didn't have the confidence to just like straight up say what I was doing, and I also did not know how to communicate properly to my parents. I think the first time I really noticed how much I lied to my parents was in first year university. I grew up in Brampton, and if anyone knows anything about Brampton, it is like a heavily Indian Punjabi population, and so a lot of the people that I grew up with were in the same situation as me, especially the girls. They also lied to their parents. It was just so common and normalized because we all had strict traditional parents, so there was no way we could just go and do whatever we wanted. Then when I went to uni, my mind was kind of blown because I had a lot of white roommates, and that's just not how they grew up. Now, I went away for university, but I would go home every weekend to work because I'm a good little Indian girl. But I do remember the first time I wanted to stay back the weekend because I believe it was Halloween weekend, and it was also one of my roommates' birthday. So they were throwing a party and I really wanted to stay for it. All my roommates were like, just stay back this weekend. Like, come on, it'll be so fun, because I never used to party with them. I decided to stay back the weekend, but I had to figure out a game plan of like what I was going to tell my parents and like why I was staying back. I remember trying to game plan this with my roommates, and they were so confused. They were just like, just tell them you're staying for Halloween. Like, they know it's Halloween weekend, right? And I was like, that's not how this works. Like, my parents will not give a flying fuck if it's Halloween weekend. If anything, that actually makes the situation worse because they know people are going to be getting drunk and partying and things like that, and that's not a scenario they would want me to be in. So I can't say that. Do you guys see the rash? It's all patchy and dry. It's so gross. Anyways, I came up with this whole excuse about how we had a group project due and I had done my part, but then my group messed up and we need to fix all the problems and redo some stuff to make sure that we get a good mark on this. My roommates' reactions were just priceless because they were like, this is insane that you're going to this length just to tell your parents you want to stay for the weekend to party, basically. And I was like, I don't think you understand what it was like growing up with strict parents. It's just something I didn't want to get in trouble for or be lectured about or not be allowed to stay any other weekends because they knew this is what I was doing. Like, I always just had to be very careful and mindful of what I was telling them because they never created a safe space for me to actually be able to tell them the truth. I found that in the past, whenever I did tell them the truth, they would scold me for it or trust me even less, which made situations just more difficult. Like, I was just not allowed to do anything. So lying was really my only way of being able to experience life. I was honestly shocked that other people, other cultures didn't live that way. Again, I was very sheltered. I grew up in Brampton. Everyone in Brampton was like that. And so to hear my roommates say things like, oh, but my parents used to buy me alcohol when I was in high school. I remember watching my parents smoke weed, or, you know, I had my first drink with my parents. Like, I was like, that would never happen with me. Even when I was legal drinking age, I felt like I was hiding drinking from my parents because the first time I actually did drink in front of them, which I was old enough to do, I was probably like in my early 20s. My dad lectured me for 3 hours the next day being like, oh my God, I can't believe you had it. I wasn't even drunk. Like, they were just like, I was at a family function, I had a beer, and my dad was like, oh my God, I can't believe you had a beer. You're going to become an alcoholic, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, what the fuck? So those were the type of situations I was avoiding. And I honestly don't know why my parents didn't even trust me. I was a really, really good kid, which made this whole process even more fucked up because I don't even know why I had to lie or justify myself. Like, I was a kid that never got in trouble. My average was always in like the 80s and 90s. I was part of extracurricular activities all the time. My teachers loved me. You know, I just used to win awards all the time. I worked 20 to 30 hours a week whenever I was in school, from high school into like university, sometimes even more. So it's not like I was doing anything that was very irresponsible or put my parents in a place where they felt like they should mistrust me. They just had a really big fear that I would mess up or do something wrong and maybe embarrass them, or I don't know, get myself into a bad situation, which really frustrated me because I was like, I've never done anything to make you feel that way. And even when I did lie, like let's say I stayed back the weekend to party, whatever, it's not like I was getting drunk to the point where I was, you know, blackout and not conscious of what I was doing. I would say like 98% of the time I was the designated driver, so I wasn't even like heavily drinking or drinking at all. Or I was drinking, but I wasn't like to the point where I was like incoherent. Like there's very few times in my life where I've actually like gotten blackout drunk or I've done anything bad. Like honestly, probably the worst thing I've done is maybe get blackout drunk, but even then I'm like around people that I trust and I know. I'm not just like doing it with whoever. So when I did lie, I was still very much mindful and responsible not to do anything stupid, which I think is important. If you're going to lie, don't do anything that's going to get you into more trouble if you're already lying. The next step up after lying was half truths. So like I would tell my parents where I was going or what I was doing, but it wasn't the full picture. Maybe I would tell them I'm going to a bar, something a little bit more casual, but I was actually like downtown clubbing. You know, it's kind of like a half truth. Like, yes, I am going out. Yes, there's going to be alcohol involved, but it is a little bit more ratchet than I'm painting it out to be. Or I would also lie about like who I was with. So like maybe I'd say, hey, I'm going out to dinner with a friend, but actually I was going out to dinner with like my boyfriend. But yeah, that was like more the half truths, the white lies. And again, like I knew my parents well enough to understand which situations to use this in versus just straight up lying. I'm like really hating how this eyeshadow is turning out. It looks, I don't know, like gray and muddy. Like it doesn't look vibrant. So I need to figure out how to fix this, but I'm not sure how. I think I'm gonna try to stick this purple sparkly eyeshadow on top. That's doing something. Anyways, I eventually got to a point where I just straight up started telling them what I was gonna do and not caring. Like it wasn't, I'm gonna ask you for permission. This was more just, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm just giving you a heads up and letting you know. And whether you like it or not, I'm gonna follow through with it. I did this a lot with like big life decisions where I knew I couldn't really hide things from my parents. Like they were gonna find out regardless. So at that point I was like, okay, I'm gonna tell you and you're just not gonna like it. And I just kind of dealt with those consequences of them really not liking it, but still following through with what I wanted to do. So for example, me becoming a makeup artist or moving out with my now husband before we got married, traveling before I got married, things like that, where I had to actually tell them what I was doing. Like there was no way I could hide it from them. That probably caused the most problems because obviously they didn't love the things that I was doing or the things that I was telling them. But I was very much the type of person that I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna do this and just kind of deal with the consequences later. If they hate me, they hate me. If it causes a rift in our relationship or, you know, awful energy in the house, then it is what it is. Because I didn't want to look back at my life and regret not making the choices that made me happy or that I knew would be right for me. I think what really sucked about doing things that way was how lonely the process was and how much you became the bad guy. Like I was definitely the most hated in my family. You know, my parents obviously weren't happy with me, and then that energy would reflect in the house, and it made living in the house really uncomfortable, not just for me, but for everyone living in the house. And I remember having like my sisters come to me and just being like, why are you like this? Because you're not listening to mom and dad, they're starting to complain to us about it, and it's just so annoying. Like, can't you just behave, basically? I really did end up becoming the outcast of my family, and I think this is why so many people choose not to go down this path, because it is very lonely and it's scary and it's isolating. You end up becoming the black sheep, and I think especially at that age when you're younger and you're, you know, teens, your 20s, there's nothing more you want than to belong and feel loved. When you're going about things this way, that's definitely not how you're going to feel. So I really do sympathize and understand why people have a hard time standing up for themselves and kind of going against the grain. It's definitely not for the weak, and it's definitely not easy. Choosing to put yourself first in a brown family is so heavily frowned upon. You definitely have to be prepared to be the bad guy in the situation. You're gonna be the one that ends up being blamed for the family problems and for ruining the family dynamics. And that's a really tough pill to swallow. You know, I made all these decisions, but then I also had really low self-love and self-confidence. Like I just felt like, you know, nobody understood me, nobody liked me, that I wasn't loved or wanted. When I was going through the height of my PMDD and having ideations of wanting to unalive myself, that was a big cause of it. I just felt like, you know, everything I do is not right and nobody likes me and nobody understands me. So like if I wasn't here, then like no one would miss me and everyone's problems would be solved. Like that was genuine thoughts that went through my brain from making decisions like this and kind of like putting myself first and wanting to do what was right for me. So yeah, on one hand you get to do what you want, on the other hand it's so lonely. Like, so I can't even begin to describe how lonely it is. Even though I didn't really show it, I carried around so much guilt and shame because of that. I so badly wanted to be loved and accepted for who I was and just wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I didn't get why my family couldn't accept me, especially because the things I was doing wasn't like awful or bad. Like I said, I was a really good kid. Like I didn't get into any type of trouble. So I think that's what fucked with my mind the most. I felt like I was just doing normal things that people my age should be doing, and yet I was painted out to be this bad guy for wanting to do it. Anyways, I think the first time I really realized how good I was at lying to my parents and how much it was necessary for me to lie to my parents was in and around the age of like 24, 25. I did get my first glimpse of it in university when I told you guys about that story with my friends and why they didn't understand I had to lie about staying back to party. But I wasn't able to fully comprehend what any of that meant because I was like 18, 19 at the time. When I hit about 24, I was dating my now husband, and this story is just so vivid in my memory. Like it was very much an epiphany moment and made it so clear to me that the way I lied to my parents is actually insane, and like how good I was at it is actually insane. It was just such a like, what the fuck is happening moment. So basically, my husband and I had decided to stay the night at a hotel, and I had picked him up. We were driving to the hotel. We had probably been gone about like a half an hour at this point, and my husband realized he forgot something back home, and he's like, oh, we need to turn around and go back. And I was like, okay. So we drove back. By the time we got back to his house, it was like an hour had passed since we had already left. On the way back there, I was like drilling him with questions. I was like, what are you gonna say when you walk through the door and your parents ask why you came back? And what are you gonna do if they don't see the car that dropped you off is outside waiting for you while you pick this thing up? Because this was around the time that we hadn't introduced each other to our parents yet, so they didn't know about me. And I was like, maybe we can say that your friends went to go pick something up from the store and you're just gonna grab this thing from the house and then walk over to the store or something. I was literally just like going on and spiraling. Like I had so much anxiety for him. Cause if that was me in the situation, I would have just been like, well, that thing we forgot at home is just at home now, like we're not going back for it, that's it. I remember the look on his face just so clearly. Like he was really confused. He was just like, I don't even think they're gonna notice that I came back. Like, what are you talking about? Like they're not gonna ask me any of these things. And I think in that moment is when I really realized how fucked up my situation was, because I'm like, wow, my parents would have asked me 1,000,001 questions. I would have had to come up with a whole elaborate story about why I had to come back and like where this car that dropped me off was and like who I was with and just all this stuff. Like I always had to think at least 50 million steps ahead, especially because like my dad was a really sharp man. Like he remembered everything, every little detail. Like he caught on to things really, really fast. So you could not mess up, you know, any little detail because he would catch on to it. And so I had to become a very strategic, very smart liar. I had to think of every little detail possible. In that moment is when it really hit me, the lengths I had to take in order just to like live my life. And it made me really sad. It actually was kind of hard to accept because I was like, oh no, actually maybe this is just his situation. I know so many girls that are like this, and this is the normal, like this is just what us girls have to go through. But, you know, looking back at that situation and then looking back at what it was like for my friends in university and, you know, how they never had to lie to their parents, I think I started putting two and two together, like how messed up all of this was and how much I had normalized the whole situation in my head to make it seem like this is just how things are. This is also in and around the time I think I started to really just tell my parents what I was doing and not ask for permission anymore. I did do that in the past a little bit, but I took it to another level at that point. I think this was also in and around the time where I started to move into this stage of like rage and rebellion and just not caring what anyone says, and also really like shutting down and distancing myself from my family because I felt like they just didn't get me. This was probably around the time where I started causing the most problems for my family and really started feeling like the black sheep. I also probably carried the most amount of guilt and shame around this time too. It wasn't until maybe like my later 20s, especially like after I had moved out at the age of 27, where I moved into more of a stage of grief and forgiveness towards myself and towards my parents. I really did grieve the fact that I didn't get the life I felt like I deserved. And so I felt really sad for myself because at that point was when I started dealing with the feelings of just wanting to be validated. And I just knew I wasn't gonna get that. Right before I moved out, I got into a massive fight with my parents. They weren't happy that I was moving out with my now husband before we got married. We were engaged at the time though. My dad didn't even come to like move me in. That's how bad it was. At this point, I was probably like a year and a half into my healing journey, and I remember writing a letter to my parents before I moved out, just explaining how they needed to trust me and my decisions. I remember writing in the letter that they needed to trust they did a good job raising me and that I was making good decisions for myself, and that I've proved that I've made good decisions for myself throughout my life because I've never gotten into any type of trouble or anything like that, and that I'm successful and I'm doing well for myself. And I also shared lessons that they've taught me through life, like how my dad taught me to be independent and courageous and always stand up for myself, and other things like time management, all this stuff that he did teach me. And from my mom, like how she taught me how to love and be kind and caring and to keep the child alive in me and all this stuff. So I wrote all these nice things in this letter to my parents and just like basically telling them that they needed to learn how to let me go because I'm an adult now, and that they needed to trust that they did a good enough job raising me to be able to be on my own and make my own decisions. I also remember having a separate conversation with my mom about, you know, I need to be able to make my own mistakes, because when they're dead and gone, knock on wood, they're not going to be there to bail me out of everything. So I need to be able to go through life, make mistakes, and make my own decisions. So if I don't get that practice now when they are around, and you know, when I do make mistakes and I can go to them for help and whatever, then like, when am I going to learn this stuff? Like when they're not around, what am I going to do? I'm just not going to have the knowledge or intuition to be able to move through life the way I need to. My mom agreed with that, but again, it is hard to get out of your old mindsets. So even though she kind of understood, it was hard for her to apply it. 9 months after I moved out, I had started therapy, and that's when I started going through the process of learning to forgive myself about how I handled these situations. Because like I said, I carried around a lot of guilt for causing problems in my family and feeling like I was the reason for causing these energy shifts and these divides and rifts in my family. I started believing that I was just a bad person, and I really embodied that persona. It really did end up starting to reflect in the way I interacted with people. I felt very cold-hearted. I wasn't mindful of other people's feelings. I wasn't even mindful of my own feelings. Honestly, I had suppressed so much of my feelings in order to get through being really outcasted in my family that I didn't even know what I was feeling anymore. And in my mid to late 20s, I started to realize I've become this person that I don't actually believe I am. Through therapy, I really learned the process of forgiving myself for doing what I needed to do in order to survive, because that's really what this was. Like, it's not like I wanted to lie to my parents. It's not like I wanted to cause these problems in my family, whatever. If I could have avoided that, I would have, but I didn't know how to. I was never taught how to communicate properly. I wasn't taught empathy. And so I just did what I needed to do in order to achieve the life that I wanted. It very much was a survival tactic. That understanding really did help me release the shame and guilt I carried around about that situation, and also help me gain empathy for my parents, because I realized at that point that they also hadn't been taught how to like communicate or properly navigate parenting in such a different lifestyle, because they grew up in India and I grew up in Canada. So obviously the cultures are very different, right? They were just teaching me what they knew and trying to parent the way they knew how, the way their parents like parented them, you know? I realized at that point their intentions for me was good, but the execution of how they were doing it just was poor. It obviously had a damaging effect. And realizing that someone can have good intentions but a negative impact was such a big breakthrough for me, because, you know, I felt really guilty for going against what my parents wanted, and, you know, being this like trouble child when I knew they had good intentions and I should have been grateful for everything that they were doing for me, but I just felt like I couldn't. Realizing both those things can be true, that they had good intentions but a negative impact, helped me just kind of release and forgive and have a more full understanding of the situation as something that needed context and had a lot of nuance, rather than it just being like black and white. I'm 31 now, and looking back at my life, I don't regret any of the decisions I made. I think it led me to the life I'm living now, and I'm very happy with the life I'm living right now. I feel like I had to go through those hardships in order to get to this point, but now I am bearing the fruits of my labor. Looking back at the situation, I don't think I would have done things differently. I'm pretty sure I would have still lied regardless, because back then, like, I didn't know how to communicate, and neither did my parents. So it would have been like two people that didn't know how to communicate to each other still butting heads. My growth happened because I was rebellious and I was curious and I wanted to do things my own way, which led me down this path of healing. And now I have such a great relationship with my parents, and all those decisions I made when I was younger that really caused them all this stress and made them feel bad and caused a rift in our family and all that shit, none of that matters anymore. And again, I say this because I feel like I was someone that really understood my parents. My parents were definitely the type that didn't like being outside of their comfort zone, so I had to really push their limits and trust that they would eventually come around, which they always did. Of course, not everyone's parents are like that, which is why I'm saying, like, take everything I say with a grain of salt. Now, there's a few things I want to mention before I end off this video. One is I am very well aware that I have been blessed with parents that put their egos aside and eventually always come around. It may take them some time, but their love for me runs so deep that they are willing to grow and be uncomfortable and accept me for who I am, even if it takes them some time. And I'm very grateful for that. I know that not all parents are like that. So obviously what I said doesn't apply to everyone's situation, but I would like to believe that most parents are like that they're just trying to protect their kids, don't know how to communicate, and love them so deeply that they will always eventually come around. The second thing I want to mention is, if you're someone that's going through this, please do not take this video as an excuse to lie to your parents, okay? That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to have some parents come to me afterwards and be like, Kamali, you taught my kids to lie to me and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's not what I'm trying to do with this video. The whole point of this was to share a story of someone who has been through it and come out the other end, and give you some type of hope, and also help you reflect on the situation, help you understand your emotions and things like that. Now, if you are lying to your parents as a survival method, I understand, but I just want to make it very clear, do not do anything stupid. Be still respectful and mindful and trustworthy, even though you're lying. You don't want to get yourself into a situation where you're really messing up, and it honestly does give your parents the reason to not trust you. So If you're lying, please be very careful, be very mindful, be respectful. Just do it in a smart way. And then finally, if you're a parent watching this, my best advice to you is educate your kids, talk to them, communicate with them, tell them stories about your life as well and the hardships you've been through and how you got through certain situations, etc. Don't just like prevent them from doing things and tell them no and whatever. It doesn't help the situation. Your kids are going to make the decisions that they're going to make. So you might as well educate them and give them all the information that you can so they can come up with the most sound decision for themselves. This also builds trust within your relationship with your kids too, because they feel like they can come to you for genuine advice. And if your kids end up making the wrong decision, that's okay too. Those are learning experiences. You need to go through those as you're growing up in order to build confidence and reassure yourself that you can make it through difficult times. And when your kid has made a mistake and is going through that, it's your job as a parent to help them move through those feelings and help them in the best way you can to repair that mistake. That is really what's going to help build the life skills that your kid needs in the future. Just preventing them from doing things all the time and making all the decisions for them isn't going to help them in the future when they're an adult. They're just going to become indecisive people with no problem solving skills and that make decisions out of fear and anxiety. That's not what you want. You want your kids to have confidence and to also feel safe with you and trust you enough to come to you in situations where they're in trouble. Anyways, this is the final look. Not as good as I wanted it to be because my eyes are all watery and itchy because of this damn rash, but it still turned out pretty cute. If you want any of the product details, I've linked them on my LTK. The link is in the description below. If you want me to cover a topic or give you advice in my future videos, please feel free to leave a comment below or send me a DM on Instagram and hopefully I pick your message as the topic I address in my next video. And finally, I just want to finish by saying, please do not forget to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel if you liked this video. Any type of engagement you can give me really helps. It pushes my content out to more people. So I appreciate the support. And don't forget to give me a testimonial for Sephora Squad, please. Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining me in this Get Ready With Me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!